My son drove me more than 200 miles into the Arizona desert and abandoned me at a lonely rest stop. When I ran after his truck and shouted, "What are you doing?" He rolled down the window, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You should have signed the papers." Then he drove away. I was 72 years old. No car, no phone signal, no way home. 3 days later, the motel phone suddenly rang. I thought my son was finally calling to bring me back, but the first sentence I heard made my blood run cold. Before we begin, I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from your city, your country. I'd love to know. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Names and places are coincidental, but everything it's trying to say to you is worth hearing. The last thing my son said to me before he drove away was not goodbye. It wasn't "I love you." It wasn't even "see you later." It was 4 words, and those 4 words told me everything I needed to know about the man Marcus Calloway had become. I was still walking out of the restroom, still drying my hands on the back of my jeans, when I heard the engine turn over. Not the lazy idle of someone waiting, the hard, intentional rev of someone leaving. I came around the corner and saw Marcus's truck backing out of the space. My hand went up on instinct. "Marcus! Hey, Marcus!" He saw me. I know he did because he stopped. The truck just sat there, engine running, brake lights glowing red in the afternoon heat. Then the driver's window came down with that quiet electric hum, and my son looked at me through the opening. Not the way a son looks at his father after a long drive. The way a man looks at something he has already decided to leave behind. "Marcus, what are you doing? Where are you? You should have signed the papers when I asked Dad." His voice didn't shake, didn't crack, didn't carry 1 ounce of hesitation. 4 words, flat and final, like he was reading the closing line of a contract. The window went back up. The truck swung out onto Highway 93, heading north tires, throwing gravel, and inside of 30 seconds, my son was gone. I stood in that parking lot with my hand still raised in the air, reaching for a truck that was no longer there, staring at a highway that gave me absolutely nothing back. "Marcus!" I said his name one more time. Quietly. Not because I thought he could hear me, just because I needed to hear myself say it out loud, to confirm to myself that what just happened had actually happened. The heat hit me all at once, 94 degrees of October Arizona sun dropping straight down on the crown of my head. My throat clenched up. My knees did something strange, like someone had quietly loosened every joint in my legs without telling me. I pressed one hand against the side of the building just to feel something solid. I pulled out my phone. 0 bars. I walked left, 0 bars. I walked right. Held it up over my head like some kind of prayer, still nothing. I looked up at the sign above the entrance. Ironwood Station, and below that the sign I really didn't want to read, next services 47 miles. 47 miles. No car. No signal. $43 in my wallet. My blood pressure medication in my overnight bag and the afternoon sun with nowhere better to be. I walked to the wooden bench outside the main building. The kind of bench that's been baking in the Arizona sun so long it had turned the color of old bone, and I sat down. Placed my bag on my knees, pressed both palms flat on the wood, and felt the heat of it seep into my hands. My eyes burned, not from the sun. I blinked hard twice and looked out at Highway 93 stretching north. Empty. Absolutely empty. "Come on, Marcus," I said it to the highway. "Come on, son, turn that truck around." Nobody turned anything around. I sat there for 20 minutes. Maybe 30. I counted 4 18-wheelers passing without slowing down. I counted 2 passenger cars, neither of which so much as tapped a brake. I tried my phone 6 more times. I stood up, walked to the edge of the lot where the ground rose slightly, held the phone as high as my arm would go, and watched the bars stay at 0 with the kind of stubborn patience that felt like mockery. When I sat back down, my legs were shaking. Not from fear, not yet. From the simple physical fact of being 72 years old in 94-degree heat with nowhere to go. I looked at my bag. I looked at the highway. I looked at the building behind me, a low, flat structure with a faded sign, a vending machine outside that looked like it hadn't been restocked since the Clinton administration, and one door propped open with a concrete block. "Okay," I said out loud to no one in particular. "Okay, Gene, think." But the honest truth was that I wasn't thinking about what to do next. I was thinking about what Marcus had said. Not the action, the words. "You should have signed the papers when I asked." Not, "I'm sorry, Dad." Not, I didn't mean it." Not even the anger of a man who'd finally lost his temper. Just a cold, clean statement of cause and effect. "You didn't do what I wanted, so here we are." The papers he was talking about. I knew exactly what papers. 47 acres out at Copper Mesa Flats. Land that Eleanor and I had bought 30 years ago for $18,000 because we loved how the morning light hit the desert floor out there. Land that was now sitting in a rezoning corridor that was about to make it worth more money than either of us had dreamed of when we signed that deed together. 3 times Marcus had asked me to sign it over. 3 times I had said no. And the 3rd time, 6 weeks ago, standing at my front door at 9 o'clock at night, he had looked at me with something in his eyes I hadn't wanted to name. Now I was naming it. The sun dropped another degree toward the mountains. My shadow stretched long and thin across the gravel. Somewhere behind me inside the building, I heard a door open. Footsteps on concrete. Slow, unhurried footsteps, the kind that belong to a man who has walked the same path so many times, he no longer needs to think about it. I didn't turn around right away. I just sat there on that bleached-out bench staring at a highway that had swallowed my son whole and listened to those footsteps get closer. "You've been sitting out here a while," a voice said. Deep-weathered calm. The voice of a man who had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. I turned around. A tall man somewhere in his late 60s stood a few feet behind me. Sun-leathered face. Salt and pepper hair cut close. Work shirt rolled to the elbows. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, not pity, not curiosity. Something older than both of those. "My son left," I said. Because what else was there to say? The man looked out at the highway for a moment. Then he pulled up the other chair that was leaning against the wall and sat down beside me without being invited and without needing to be. "How long ago?" 30, maybe 40 minutes. "He coming back?" I looked at that man, this complete stranger, who had just sat down next to me like we'd known each other for years, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Not break. Crack. The way old wood sounds just before it gives way. "No," I said. "I don't think he is." The man nodded once, like that was all he needed to hear. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a worn business card, and set it on the arm of my bench without handing it to me directly. "Thomas Briggs," he said. "I run this place. We have a room if you need it. Clean, quiet. Nobody's going to bother you." I looked at the card. Then I looked at him. "Why would you do that?" "You don't know me." Thomas Briggs looked out at the highway one more time. Something moved behind his eyes. Something that had nothing to do with the question I'd just asked, and everything to do with an answer he wasn't ready to give yet. "Let's just say I have my reasons," he said. "You hungry?" My stomach answered before I did. I hadn't eaten since breakfast 7 hours and 200 miles ago. "Yeah," I admitted. "I am." "Good." He stood up, brushed the dust off his jeans, and headed toward the door. "Come on inside. Heat out here'll kill you if you let it." I picked up my bag. I looked one last time at Highway 93, at that long, flat, merciless stretch of road that had taken my son and given me nothing back. Then I followed a stranger inside. Tom set a plate of crackers on the table and pulled out the chair across from me. He didn't ask questions right away. He just sat there, the kitchen light humming above us, and waited. That was the impression Tom gave me, as if he understood that some stories needed silence before they could start. He didn't do this overnight, I finally said. Tom wrapped both hands around his mug. Most things like this don't. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee and let my mind go back. Not to this afternoon. Further. Back to February, when it all began. The first time Marcus asked it was a Sunday. He'd driven up from Phoenix alone, no Renee, which should have told me something. He showed up at my door in Kingman with a bag of groceries and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in the car. "I thought we could have lunch," he said. "Just the two of us." We sat at Eleanor's old kitchen table. He made sandwiches. We talked about the weather, about his job, about Sophie's grades. It felt almost normal. Then halfway through his coffee, he set the mug down and folded his hands on the table. "Dad, I've been thinking about the Copper Mesa land." I kept chewing. "What about it?" "It's just sitting there. 47 acres of desert. You're not using it. Renee and I have been looking at some investment opportunities, and if we could get the deed transferred even partially, we could put that land to work." I looked at him for a long moment. "Your mother and I paid $18,000 for that land. It's the last thing we bought together before she got sick." "I know that, Dad." "Then you know why I'm not signing anything." He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they're storing the answer away rather than accepting it. He finished his coffee, helped me wash the dishes, and drove back to Phoenix. I stood at the window and watched his car disappear around the corner and told myself it was just a question. Nothing more than that. I was wrong. The second time, I said to Tom, he brought Renee. Tom raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. May, 5 months ago. They arrived together on a Saturday afternoon, and Renee came through the door like she owned every room she walked into. She hugged me, the kind of hug that doesn't reach the eyes, and set a bottle of wine on the counter. "We thought we'd make a day of it," she said brightly. We sat on the back porch. Renee talked about kitchen renovations and a vacation they were planning. Marcus stayed quieter than usual, refilling glasses, nodding along. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the sun was low and the shadows were long across the yard, that the conversation shifted. "Jean," Renee said, setting her glass down with a small click, "Marcus tells me you two talked about the Copper Mesa property in February." "We talked," I said. "We'd really like to revisit that conversation." She smiled. "There's a development corridor expanding through that part of the state. The timing is actually very good right now." "How would you know about a development corridor?" I asked. She blinked once quickly. "Public record," she said. "Anyone can access planning documents." Marcus leaned forward. "Dad, we're not asking you to give it up entirely. A partial transfer. Keep 20 acres, put the rest in both our names. It's fair." I looked at my son. Really looked at him. "Marcus, that land was your mother's wish. She told me specifically she wanted it to stay in the family whole, not split up." "Renee is family," he said. The porch went quiet. A hummingbird hovered at the feeder Eleanor had hung 10 years ago, then darted off. I picked up my glass. "I think it's time we called it an evening," I said. Renee's smile didn't waver. That bothered me more than anything she'd said. Tom exhaled slowly. "She already knew about the rezoning 8 months ago. I figured that out later," I said. "But that night I just thought she was ambitious. Didn't understand what I was dealing with." And the third time, I set my coffee down. August. 6 weeks before this afternoon. It was a Tuesday night close to 10 o'clock, and I was already in bed when I heard knocking at the front door. I came downstairs in my robe and found Marcus on the porch. No Renee this time. His jaw was tight, and his eyes had a look I hadn't seen before, not angry exactly. Cornered. "Can I come in?" he asked. We sat at the kitchen table again. No food, no pretense. He put a manila folder in front of me. "What's this?" I asked. "A deed transfer form, already prepared. All you have to do is sign." I didn't touch it. "Marcus, it's 10 at night. I know what time it is." He pushed the folder an inch closer. Dad, I need you to do this. I need you to trust me. I do trust you, I said carefully. That's not what this is about. Then sign it. His voice had gone flat. The window on this opportunity is closing. If we don't move now, the value drops and we lose everything we could have made. You mean everything you could have made, I said quietly. He stood up. The chair scraped hard against the tile floor. He looked at me across the table for a long moment, and in that moment I saw something in his face that I didn't recognize. Something cold and calculating, the expression of a man doing math rather than talking to his father. You're going to regret this, he said. I stood up too, walked to the front door and held it open. Good night, Marcus. He walked out without another word. I closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and stood in the hallway, listening to his engines start and fade down the street. I did not sleep that night. Tom was quiet for a while after I finished. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a truck rolled past on the highway. 3 times, he said finally. February, May, August. And then he plans a trip. Yes, I said. Tom looked at me steadily. Jean, you said you transferred the deed before this weekend. To your granddaughter, Sophie. I did. 3 months ago. Pat Dunmore handled it. It's done. Tom nodded slowly, and I noticed something shift in his expression. A careful, deliberate look, like a man deciding how much to say. Get some rest tonight, he said. There are things you still don't know yet. I looked at him. What things? He picked up our mugs and carried them to the sink. Tomorrow, he said. We'll talk tomorrow. I sat alone at that kitchen table for a long time after he left the room, turning his words over in my mind, wondering what else there was to know, and whether after everything Marcus had already done, I was ready to hear it. That first night at Ironwood Station, lying on a bed that wasn't mine, and staring at a ceiling I didn't recognize, I couldn't stop thinking about why. Not how I knew how. But why that land? Why now? Why Marcus would go this far for 47 acres of Arizona desert? The mattress was thin and the room smelled like old wood and something faintly chemical like cleaning fluid that had dried too fast. I put one arm behind my head and let my eyes trace the water stain near the light fixture, and Eleanor came to me the way she always did when things fell apart quietly, without warning, like the first light before sunrise. She would have hated this room. Jean, she used to say whenever we'd stop at some roadside motel during a long drive. If a place doesn't have a window that opens all the way, it's not worth staying in. I almost laughed at that. The window in room 7 opened exactly 4 inches before the latch caught. We bought the Copper Mesa land in the spring of 1994. 47 acres out in the flats east of Kingman, and every single person who knew us thought we had lost our minds. My brother called from Flagstaff the day we signed the papers. $18,000, he said flatly. Jean, what are you going to grow out there, Rocks? We're not growing anything, I told him. We just wanted something that was ours. Eleanor was standing right beside me when I said it. She reached over and took my hand, not the soft, sentimental kind of grip, but the firm, certain kind, the grip of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and was glad someone else finally understood it too. I could still feel that grip if I tried hard enough. Even now. We weren't buying an investment. We weren't buying a house site or a business plan. We were buying the feeling of standing on a piece of earth and knowing it belonged to us. That was worth $18,000. To us, it was worth considerably more. Eleanor started going out there on winter mornings, maybe a year after we bought it. She'd fill a thermos with black coffee, drive the 30 minutes out, and sit on the hood of her car while the sun came up over the flats. She told me about it one evening at the kitchen table, and my chest did something warm and complicated as I listened. What do you actually do out there for an hour by yourself? I asked. She tilted her head at me, that particular tilt that meant I'd asked the wrong question. I sit, she said. I watch the light change. It's the only place I've ever found where everything slows down enough that I can actually think straight. Think about what? Everything. She reached across the table and touched my hand. About us. About what matters. You should come sometime, Jean. You'd understand it better than you could out here. I went once. She was right. There was something about that open, flat land at first light. No traffic, no obligations, no noise of any kind that pressed everything down to its true size. We sat on the hood together and shared the thermos and didn't say a word for 45 minutes, and it was the most at peace I'd felt in years. That was 1997. Eleanor died in 2018. I could not sell that land after she was gone. People expected me to. My accountant mentioned it twice, and the year after the funeral, Marcus brought it up, gently, carefully, the way he still knew how to be careful then. "Dad," he'd said, sitting at the kitchen table, his voice quiet. "If you ever want to liquidate any assets, the Copper Mesa parcel might—" "No," I said. He didn't push. That was before Renee. 3 months ago, I was reading in the living room when I heard Renee's voice from the hallway. She was on her phone, and the words came through the door before I could stop hearing them. "Copper Mesa." A pause. Then zoning approval. A longer pause. Then clearly and deliberately, "before the announcement goes public." I sat very still in that chair. My book was open in my lap, and my eyes were fixed on the same line I'd been reading for the past 10 minutes, and I did not move. When Renee came into the living room a minute later, she was perfectly composed. Phone already back in her pocket, smiling like she'd just been checking the weather. "Were you napping, Jean?" she asked. "Reading," I said. My voice came out level. I was proud of that. I called Pat Dunmore the next morning. Pat had handled my family's legal matters since Eleanor and I signed those Copper Mesa papers in 1994. She was methodical, direct, and constitutionally incapable of softening news she believed you needed to hear straight. "Jean," she said, once I'd explained what I'd overheard, "Copper Mesa Flats is inside a projected industrial development corridor. The rezoning hasn't been publicly announced, but it's been sitting in Planning Commission documents for 18 months. Accessible to anyone who knows where to look." "What's the land worth?" I asked. She set her pen down. I heard it click against the desk. "Currently around 300,000. After the official announcement," she paused. "Projected range is 2.4 to 3.1 million, depending on final zoning classification." My throat tightened so fast I had to press 2 fingers against the side of my neck and breathe deliberately. "Pat, the 3 times Marcus asked me to sign a transfer, those were all within the window of time after Renee would have accessed those documents," she said. "Yes, I noticed that too." I sat in her office for a moment, with that information settling over me like dust after a collapse. February, May, August. All of it deliberate, all of it timed. My son had stood in my living room 3 separate times and asked me to hand over the last thing Eleanor had ever loved, and every single one of those visits had been orchestrated by a woman who had known the land's true value before he ever knocked on my door the first time. Then I thought about Sophie. She was 16, and she came to my house twice a week after school without being asked. She sat at Eleanor's kitchen table and talked to me about her classes, her friends, a book she was halfway through. Small things. But she looked at me the way Eleanor used to, like I was a person worth listening to rather than a problem to be managed. One afternoon in July, she had picked up the photograph of Eleanor from the shelf. The one from the Copper Mesa trip, Eleanor sitting on the car hood, with her thermos squinting happily into the sunrise, and turned it over in her hands. "She looks so happy here," Sophie said. "She was," I said, and my voice nearly broke on the second word, and I had to clear my throat to cover it. That was her favorite place in the world. Sophie set the photograph back on the shelf with both hands, gently, like it was something fragile. "Will you take me there sometime?" I looked at her and felt something shift in my chest, not the hollow ache I carried for Eleanor, but something different. something that felt improbably like forward motion. "Anytime you want," I said. I called Pat that same afternoon. 3 weeks later, the deed to Copper Mesa Flats was in Sophie's name. She didn't know. Marcus didn't know. Renee didn't know. Only Pat and Pat had the professional discretion the law required of her. Lying in room 7 on Friday night, staring at that water-stained ceiling, I put the pieces together in their full shape for the first time. The trip had been planned. The location had been chosen. The timing was not an accident. They had moved after Renee saw I'd visited Pat's office. They had run out of time, and they knew it, and so they had done the only thing left available to them. But they were already too late. The land had belonged to Sophie for 3 full months before Marcus ever appeared on my porch with 2 cups of coffee. Whatever they had planned for this weekend, it was finished before it started. They just didn't know it yet. I pressed my hand flat against my chest, and my eyes burned in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not from anger. From something older and heavier than anger. Something that lived right alongside Eleanor's name in the part of me I didn't let anyone see. They wanted to sell her Sunrise. The room settled into quiet around me. Outside, a truck rolled through on Highway 93, its headlights sweeping a slow arc across my ceiling. And then I heard its soft footsteps on the gravel path outside my window, pausing just briefly, then moving on. Someone had been standing outside room 7. I didn't know who or why. 3 weeks before they drove me out to the desert, Marcus showed up at my door on a Sunday morning with 2 cups of coffee from the place on Miller Street, the one I'd been going to for 20 years. He knew my order by heart. He'd always known it. That was the thing about Marcus. When he wanted to be charming, he was very good at it. He was standing on the porch in a light jacket, both cups in a cardboard carrier, with that loose, easy expression I remembered from when he was in his 20s, before the job in Phoenix, before Renee, before manila folders on kitchen tables at 10 o'clock at night. "Thought you might want company," he said. "Come in," I said. He moved into the living room, the way he had 1,000 times before, cups on the table jacket over the back of the chair, settling into the armchair nearest the window, with his legs stretched out like a man who had nowhere pressing to be. I sat across from him and wrapped both hands around my coffee and waited. "How's the knee?" he asked. "Same," I said. "How's Scottsdale treating you?" "Busy." He shook his head. "We had a contractor on a flip job who nearly doubled the timeline. 3 weeks behind because he couldn't source the right tile. 3 weeks, Dad, for tile." "Did you fire him?" "After the fact." He laughed, a real laugh, loose and genuine, and for a moment he was just my son sitting in my chair complaining about his week. Sophie aced her AP chemistry exam, by the way, the one she said was going to destroy her. My face did something involuntary at that something warm moved through my chest, and I found myself smiling before I meant to. She told me she was terrified of it. She was terrified, and she still pulled a 94, Marcus said. He sounded proud. Genuinely proud, not performed. "She gets that from you, you know. That thing where she doesn't let people see how hard she's working." I held my cup with both hands and kept my expression easy, but I was watching him. The way you watch a familiar road after a hard frost, not afraid but careful, paying attention to the surface. And what I noticed as we talked about Sophie and the contractor and an old Western we'd watched together when he was 12 was simple. He had not said one word about the land. Not one. After 3 visits, the polite Sunday in February, the pressured Saturday in May, the near-threatening Tuesday night in August, Marcus had come back, and he had talked about tile contractors and chemistry exams, and Copper Mesa Flats had not left his lips once. In my experience, when a man who wanted something stopped asking for it, one of 2 things had happened. Either he had accepted no, or he had found another way around it. Marcus refilled both cups from the carafe without being asked. He'd always known where everything was in this house and sat back down, and it was right around then that his posture shifted. Not dramatically, just a degree or two. Shoulders a little looser, expression a little more open, like a man arriving at the portion of his day he had actually planned for. "Dad," he said, setting his cup down with both hands around it. "Why don't we take a little trip next weekend, just the three of us? No agenda, no plans. Get out of Kingman for a couple of days. Some good air, some different scenery." I looked at him. "We never really traveled much." "That's exactly why," he smiled. "We should." "Where?" I asked. He moved one hand in a loose, vague gesture. "There's a rest stop motel up on 93. Real quiet. Good air. Nothing fancy, but you'd like it." "You've been there before?" I asked. "Renee looked it up," he said. "She thought the quiet would be good for you." He said it evenly, warmly, without a flicker of anything else crossing his face. But I sat with that sentence for a moment. Renee had chosen the location. Renee, who had stood in my living room in May and called the development corridor public record as easily as commenting on the weather. Renee, whose voice I had heard through the hallway door, Copper Mesa, zoning approval, before the announcement goes public. And yet, I looked at my son, at the morning light falling across his face, at the coffee cup easy in his hands, at the small, real pride that had moved through his voice when he talked about Sophie's exam, and something in me did the one thing I had not expected it to do. It reached toward him, not because I trusted the plan, not because I believed there was no agenda behind the rest stop on Highway 93, but because he was my son, and he was sitting in my chair, and I was 72 years old, and I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with my knee or my blood pressure. Tired of suspicion. Tired of deadbolts and legal offices and knowing things I had not wanted to know. Tired of looking at Marcus and seeing only the man with the folder rather than the boy who used to watch westerns with me on Friday nights. "All right," I said. "Next weekend." Something moved across his face, quick, just a flicker, and then the easy smile was back, warm and familiar. "Good," he said. "That's good, Dad. You'll like it." I said yes, knowing I shouldn't have. Not because I'd forgotten what Marcus had come for 3 times to my door, 3 times with the land in his hands, like something he was owed. I said yes because I wanted to believe the man sitting across from me, with Eleanor's coffee table between us, was still somewhere underneath all of it, my son. And because the deed was already signed, and Sophie's name was already on it, and there was nothing left for them to take. If they wanted to try anyway, I wanted to be there when they found out. After he left, I went out to the backyard and stood among Eleanor's cactus plants, the saguaro she'd put along the south fence in 2003, the barrel cactus arranged in clay pots by the gate. 21 years she'd been planting things out here, and they were still growing without her. That struck me as both completely ordinary and completely unfair. I ran one finger along the spine of the nearest barrel cactus, not hard enough to cut, just enough to feel the sharpness, and my eyes went hot in that way I couldn't always control. My chest had that hollow, pulling ache again, the one that belonged to Eleanor, and to everything I hadn't been able to protect since she left. "What am I doing?" I said out loud to no one. To Eleanor. To the cactus plants that had outlasted her. The morning was warm and bright and entirely indifferent. I went inside and packed a small bag. One change of clothes, my blood pressure medication. A book I'd been meaning to finish for 2 months. I didn't bring much because Marcus said it was just 2 days. Just the 3 of us. I believed him, or I told myself I did. Looking back now, I think part of me already knew. I just wasn't ready to know it out loud. Friday morning, Marcus pulled up at 8 o'clock sharp. Renee was in the passenger seat. She turned around when I got in the back and said, "Morning, Dad," with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I was very good at that, too. The sky was clear, and the air still carried that cool edge that October mornings hold on to before the desert burns it off by noon. I had my thermos, my blood pressure medication, in the front pocket of my bag, and the book I'd been trying to finish for 2 months. Normal things. Ordinary things. The kind of things you bring when someone tells you it's just a couple of days and you believe them or tell yourself you do. "You eat breakfast?" Marcus asked, pulling out of my street. "Toast," I said. "I'm fine. There's a place in Wickiup if you want to stop." "I'm fine, Marcus." He nodded and put both hands on the wheel, and that was more or less the end of our conversation for the next 2 hours. Renee had her phone out before we hit the highway. Not in the casual way people scroll through their morning, she was reading something. Her eyes moving fast and deliberate, thumb swiping upward in quick, efficient strokes. She didn't look up. She didn't turn around. In the first 2 hours on the road, she didn't say a word to me that wasn't a yes or a no to something I'd offered first. I watched the desert open up on both sides of us. The saguaro thinned out, and the land flattened, and Highway 93 stretched ahead like something that had been drawn with a ruler. I poured coffee from my thermos and held it in both hands and tried to read my book. I got through 4 pages, read the same paragraph 3 times without retaining a word of it. Around the 3rd hour, Marcus pulled into a small gas station, 2 pumps, a sun-bleached awning, a handwritten sign for cold drinks in the window. He said he needed gas. Renee said she'd stretch her legs. I stayed in the car. Through the window, I watched them walk to the far side of the lot, away from the pumps, away from the attendant. Marcus had his arms crossed. Renee was talking, her head angled toward him, her voice low enough that I caught nothing through the glass. Then Marcus nodded once, slow, deliberate, and Renee glanced back toward the car. Toward me. Her eyes found the window for just a moment before she looked away. But I picked up my thermos and took a long sip and kept my face neutral and my eyes on the mountains in the distance because I had learned a long time ago that the most useful thing you can sometimes do is let people believe you haven't noticed. The 4th hour was the quietest. Marcus drove and Renee read, and I watched the road and nobody asked anybody anything. My knee had stiffened from sitting, and I shifted in my seat and thought about Eleanor's cactus garden and Sophie's chemistry exam, and tried very hard not to think about what I was thinking about. It was in a small town, a 4-way stop, a feed store, a bar, with a hand-painted sign that Renee's phone rang. She looked at the screen and something moved across her face, quick and purposeful, and she said, "I'll just be a minute," and stepped out of the car before Marcus had fully stopped at the red light. She walked maybe 10 feet away, her back to the window, one hand pressed over her free ear. The window between us muffled everything, but she had turned slightly away from the car, and when a truck rumbled past and left one clear second of quiet in its wake, her voice carried through the gap at the top of the doorframe, where the seal had never quite fit right. "By tonight, it'll be done." She was back in the car 30 seconds later, phone already in her pocket, expression smooth and easy. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just work stuff, Dad." She smiled at me over her shoulder. "Nothing important." Marcus said nothing. But his right hand moved on the steering wheel, fingers tightening, then releasing a motion so small that if I hadn't been watching his hands for the past 4 hours, I would have missed it entirely. I turned back to the window. The desert out here had gone flat and empty in every direction, no houses, no billboards, no indication that the world contained anything other than scrub brush and distance. I had my thermos in my lap and my book face down on the seat beside me, and I found I had no interest in either. I thought about the Sunday morning 3 weeks ago, the coffee from Miller Street, the easy laugh about the contractor, the vague gesture toward Highway 93, real quiet, good air, you'd like it. I thought about Renee choosing the location, Renee looking it up. By tonight, it'll be done. About an hour out from wherever we were going, I looked up and caught Marcus's eyes in the rearview mirror. Just for a second, less than a second. He was looking at me, not at the road behind us, not checking a lane change, At me directly the way you look at something you've been carrying for a long time and are almost ready to put down. Then he looked away, back to the road, both hands steady on the wheel. We pulled into Ironwood Station at 2:17 in the afternoon. I remember the time because I checked my phone still looking for a signal. Marcus said he needed to use the restroom. Renee said she'd get water from the vending machine. They both got out. I sat there for a moment, watching them walk in opposite directions, and felt something I hadn't felt since the night Marcus showed up unannounced at 10 o'clock with a folder full of transfer papers. That same feeling, that same cold weight settling into my chest, like something that had finally finished falling. I got out of the car to stretch my legs. The heat hit me the way Arizona heat always does in October, like something that has been waiting patiently all day just for you. I stood beside the car for a moment, pressing one hand to the small of my back, rolling my shoulders, letting my knee unbend from 6 hours of sitting. The parking lot was mostly empty. A pickup truck near the building, a camper van at the far end. The kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like absence. I was walking toward the building when I heard it. The engine. Not starting it was already running. The sound of tires on gravel, slow at first, then purposeful. I turned around and watched Marcus's car backing out of the parking space. Both of them inside. Marcus behind the wheel. Renee in the passenger seat, her face straight ahead. "Hey." I raised one hand. "Hey, Marcus." The car kept moving. The rear end swung toward the highway, unhurried, deliberate. I walked faster. My knee pulled with every step, but I walked faster anyway, my hand still up, my voice climbing. "Marcus, Marcus, wait." The car stopped. For 1 second, it just sat there at the edge of the lot, engine idling, front end pointed toward Highway 93. My chest seized. My legs kept moving toward it, and then the driver's window came down. Marcus looked at me through the open window. His face was composed. No anger in it, no guilt, no grief. The face of a man completing a transaction he had already settled in his mind days ago. "You should have signed the papers when I asked Dad." His voice was quiet. Even. The way you'd speak to someone you were no longer arguing with because the argument was over, and you had already decided the outcome. I stood there 4 feet from the car, and my mouth opened, but what came out wasn't words. It was just air, just the beginning of something that had nowhere to go. The window went up. The car pulled onto Highway 93 and accelerated away, and within 30 seconds it had gone around the curve, and the sound of the engine dropped off. And then there was nothing. Just the wind moving low across the parking lot. Just the dust lifting off the gravel in a slow, lazy spiral, and then settling back down like it had never been disturbed. I stood there with my hand still halfway up in the air. I don't know how long I stood like that. Long enough for the dust to settle completely. Long enough for the heat to press down through the top of my head and into my shoulders. Long enough to go through every explanation my mind could construct and dismantle every single one of them. Maybe they forgot something. Maybe there's an emergency. Maybe Renee got a call, a real call, something that required them to leave immediately, and they'd be back within the hour. And Marcus had just said that those words because he was frustrated and scared, and not because "you should have signed the papers when I asked Dad." Not a reaction. Not a moment of anger. A prepared sentence. The period at the end of something that had been written weeks ago. My hand dropped to my side. I walked to the nearest bench, wooden slats bleached pale by years of sun, and sat down, and the sitting took longer than it should have because my legs were not entirely steady. I set my bag on the ground. I opened my thermos. The coffee inside had gone cold 2 hours ago, but I poured a cup anyway and held it in both hands because I needed something to hold, and I drank it slowly, and the cold bitterness of it grounded me in a way that nothing else in that moment could. My phone. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. 0 bars. Not one. I held it up, moved it left, moved it right, nothing. I called Marcus. The call didn't connect. I called again, same result. I looked up at the sign mounted on the post at the lot's edge, white letters on green, sun-faded and straightforward. Next service is 47 miles. Something moved through me then, not a collapse, not a cry, but a slow, deep cracking, the way old timber sounds, when weight has finally exceeded what it was built to hold. My eyes burned, and I pressed the back of my wrist against them, hard enough that I saw light behind my eyelids, and I kept it there until the burning receded to something I could manage. I was 72 years old. I had $43 in my wallet, my blood pressure medication, a change of clothes, and a book I would never finish. I was sitting on a bench in the Arizona desert 200 miles from my house with 0 phone signal, and the next gas station 47 miles away. My son had driven away and left me here. 3 hours passed. Trucks rolled by on the highway without slowing. A couple in a station wagon pulled in, used the restroom, left without looking in my direction. The sun moved across the sky in that slow, indifferent way it has, and the shadows stretched longer, and the heat began to ease by degrees so small you could only measure them in retrospect. I did not cry. I wanted to. I could feel it building in my chest, pressing up against my ribs from the inside, hot and heavy and entirely reasonable under the circumstances. But every time it rose close enough to the surface, something harder pushed it back down. Not pride. Stubbornness, maybe. The same stubbornness that had kept me in that chair in August, when Marcus slid the folder across the kitchen table and waited. I thought about the 3 times he had asked. I thought about the way his hand had tightened on the steering wheel when Renee said, "By tonight, it'll be done." I thought about the Sunday morning 3 weeks ago, the coffee from Miller Street, the easy laugh, the casual gesture toward Highway 93. All of it planned. Every piece of it. The location, the timing, the invitation that had never been an invitation. Marcus had decided this before they ever pulled up to my door Friday morning. The trip, the route, the rest stop 200 miles from home. He hadn't acted on impulse or in anger. He had done it the way he did everything that mattered to him, methodically, deliberately, with Renee's guidance and his own 2 hands. I sat with that knowledge and let it settle into me, and it was the heaviest thing I had ever carried. The sun was dropping behind the mountains when the door of the main building finally opened. A man walked out, tall, unhurried, with the kind of face that has seen enough of life to stop being surprised by it. He looked at me sitting on that bench, and he didn't say, "Are you okay?" He didn't say, "Can I help you?" He just walked over, pulled up a chair, and sat down beside me, like we'd known each other for years. And then he said something I didn't expect at all. He said, "I think you could use a few days of rest, sir. We have a room." Not, "What happened?" Not, "Where's your car?" Just that, like he already knew the answers and didn't need me to explain them. I stood in the parking lot with my bag at my feet and the sun going orange behind the mountains and looked at this man, tall, unhurried, somewhere in his late 60s, with a face that had been weathered by years of desert wind into something calm and permanent, and I didn't know what to say. So I picked up my bag and followed him inside. The interior of Ironwood Station was cooler than I expected. Wood paneling, a front desk with a brass bell nobody had polished in years, a rack of road maps that nobody used anymore. The place smelled like coffee and motor oil, and something faintly like cedar, an honest smell, the smell of a building that had been used hard and maintained carefully. "Tom Briggs," the man said, extending his hand. "Gene Calloway." His handshake was firm without being demonstrative. The handshake of a man who had nothing left to prove. "June," he called toward the back hallway. A woman appeared from around the corner, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back with the kind of unhurried efficiency that told you she had worked this place long enough to move through it without thinking. She looked at Jean once quickly and whatever assessment she made she kept entirely to herself. "Room 7, Tom said. "The one facing the mountains." "Yes, sir." June turned to Jean and offered a small, genuine smile. "Follow me, Mr. Calloway." Room 7 was at the end of the building, separated from the others by a small utility alcove. It was modest, a bed with a white coverlet, a wooden dresser, a window that looked out toward a ridge of dark rock going purple in the evening light. Clean. Genuinely clean, not the kind of clean that covers something else up. "Towels are in the bathroom," June said, setting a bottle of water on the nightstand. "There's a spare blanket in the top drawer. It gets cold out here after midnight. People always underestimate it." She paused at the door. "Do you need anything else right now?" "No," I said. "Thank you, June. Just knock on the front desk if you do." She pulled the door half closed behind her, and her footsteps moved quietly back down the hall. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave slightly under my weight. Outside, the last light was leaving the sky in long streaks of deep orange and pink, and the ridge turned from purple to black. And it was, I had to admit, a beautiful view for a man who had no reason to be looking at it. I had been sitting there perhaps 30 minutes, not thinking exactly, more like waiting for my mind to decide what it wanted to do, when there was a knock at the door. Tom came in carrying a tray, a bowl of soup, dark and steaming, a plate of bread, a spoon wrapped in a cloth napkin. "Eat first," he said, setting it on the dresser beside me. "Everything else can wait." "Tom." I looked up at him. "My son, he may come back. He may have had a reason." "Eat first," Tom said, again gently but without negotiation. I ate. The soup was thick, some kind of vegetable and bean combination, and it was exactly the right temperature, and I was hungrier than I had realized. I finished all of it, and most of the bread, and somewhere in the middle of it, the shaking in my hands, that I hadn't consciously noticed until then, began to ease. Tom was still in the room, leaning against the wall near the window, waiting without making it feel like waiting. "I should explain," I said, setting the tray aside. "You don't have to. My son drove me up here and—" I stopped, pressed my lips together, started again. He left. They both left. He said something before he drove away, and then he drove away, and I don't entirely know what the next step is. Tom looked at me steadily. No shock in his face. No pity, which I was grateful for. I think pity at that moment would have been the thing that broke me. Just that steady, attentive look, the look of a man who was listening to all of it, including the parts I wasn't saying out loud. "Do you have family you can contact?" he asked. "A granddaughter. She's 16. I can't call her with this." "Anyone else? A lawyer?" "Pat Dunmore in Kingman. I'll try to reach her tomorrow when I can get a signal." Tom nodded. "There's a landline in the office. Not much signal out here on the cells, but the landline works fine. Thank you." I looked at him for a moment, and then the question I'd been carrying since the parking lot came out before I could think better of it. "Why are you doing this?" "You don't know me." Tom straightened from the wall. He walked to the door, and his hand found the frame, and he stood there for a moment with his back half turned. Then he said it quietly, in the tone of a man reciting something he had carried for a very long time. "Because someone did it for me once. A long time ago." He pulled the door closed. I sat with those words in the quiet of room 7. Outside, the desert had gone fully dark, and the wind had picked up, moving against the window, in low, steady pulses. I swung my legs up onto the bed and lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling. And for the first time since 2:17 that afternoon, I stopped trying to construct an explanation for any of it. "Sohyun." I just breathed. It was maybe 20 minutes later that June came back, just a brief knock, a crack of the door, a hand setting a coffee cup on the nightstand, without a word. I looked at it. Black. No sugar, no creamer beside it. Exactly right. I hadn't told her how I took my coffee. I hadn't told her anything. I thought about it for a moment. Then I remembered my thermos, the one I'd left on the bench outside when Tom brought me in. She must have seen it. Black coffee, no additives. The simplest explanation, and probably the right one. Some things that feel like mystery are just someone paying attention. I hadn't told her how I took my coffee. I hadn't told her anything. I wrapped both hands around the cup and drank it slowly, and thought about what Tom had said. A few days of rest. Not tonight. Not until your son comes back. A few days as though he already knew the shape of what was coming, in a way that I didn't yet. As though the duration of my stay at Ironwood Station was something he had already calculated for reasons I couldn't begin to explain. I lay there in the dark, listening to the desert wind outside the window, and thought about what he said. Someone did it for me once. A long time ago. There was a weight to those words, the kind you carry when a debt has been sitting unpaid for so long, it becomes part of who you are. I didn't know yet what that debt was, but I knew with the same certainty I'd known things my whole life before I could explain them, that it had something to do with me. Saturday morning I woke up at 5:43, the same time I'd been waking up for 30 years, and for 3 full seconds I forgot where I was. Then the desert light came through the curtains, thin and gold, and I remembered everything. The bench in the parking lot, the thermos of cold coffee, the sound of the engine pulling away. Marcus's voice flat and final through the open window. I lay still for a moment. Then I got up, pulled on my clothes, and went outside. The air at that hour was cold enough to see my breath, that sharp, clean cold that the desert produces in the early morning, like a small apology for what it does to you by noon. I walked out to the edge of the lot and held my phone up, moved it in a slow arc above my head, watched the signal indicator stay at 0. I walked to the far side of the building. 0. I climbed the slight rise behind the motel phone, extended, turning in a full circle. The mountains caught the first pink light of sunrise along their ridges. It was beautiful, and I did not care about that at all. 0 bars. I went back inside. June was already behind the front desk when I came through the door, a fresh pot going on the counter behind her. She looked up and smiled the same unhurried, genuine smile from the night before. "Morning, Mr. Calloway. How'd you sleep?" "Well enough," I said. "Better than I deserved to, probably." She set a cup on the counter and filled it without being asked. Black. No sugar. I looked at it, and then looked at her. "How did you know?" I asked. "Last night, this morning, you never asked." June set the pot down, and the corner of her mouth curved upward in a way that wasn't quite an answer, and wasn't quite deflection. "Lucky guess," she said. It was not a lucky guess. I had been a careful observer of people for 72 years, and June was not guessing. But she was not going to tell me more than that, and I decided to let it sit. She brought breakfast to the small table near the window, eggs, toast, a glass of water. I ate slowly and watched the first trucks roll through on the highway, their headlights still on in the early morning gray. Families with packed rooftop carriers, lone drivers with coffee cups on dashboards, people in the middle of going somewhere. I watched them and felt the particular ache of a man who had been going somewhere yesterday and now had no idea where he stood. Mid-morning, Tom appeared in the doorway of the dining area with another man beside him, older, compact, with round glasses, and the careful movements of someone who had spent decades making people feel calm in situations that weren't. "Gene," Tom said, "this is Arthur Nolan. He's a doctor, retired. Old friend of mine. I asked him to come by." Dr. Nolan set a worn leather bag on the table and pulled out a chair across from me. "Tom tells me you've had a long day," he said. "Mind if I take a quick look?" "I'm fine," I said. "Humor an old man," he said pleasantly. He checked my blood pressure, listened to my heart, looked at my eyes, asked a few questions about my medication. His hands were steady, and his manner was unhurried, And he didn't ask me a single word about how I'd come to be sitting in a motel at Ironwood Station with no transportation and no phone signal. When he was finished, he packed his bag and stood up. "Rest and water," he said. "That's the prescription." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "And don't go trying to walk 47 miles in the desert. I've seen men try." "I'll stay put," I said. He nodded, shook Tom's hand, and left. After lunch, I went to Tom's office and used the landline. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I hung up and dialed again. Voicemail on the second ring. This time, Marcus had seen the number. I held the receiver for a moment, listening to the silence on the line, then set it back in the cradle. There was nothing I could say to a recording that would accomplish anything I needed. The afternoon stretched long, and I sat in the chair on the walkway outside room 7, with my book open in my lap, not reading. I watched the station operate a truck pulling in for fuel, a young couple with a dog asking Tom for directions. June moving in and out of the office with the easy competence of someone who genuinely liked her work. Ordinary things. The world continuing to function entirely without regard for the fact that my son had left me in it with $43 and 0 signal. It was late afternoon when June came and found me. She sat down in the chair Tom had pulled up the evening before, and she folded her hands in her lap, and her face had a careful, uncertain quality that I hadn't seen on her before, like someone deciding how to say something they weren't sure they should say. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "this morning before you were up, we got a call." I looked at her. "What kind of call?" "A man. He didn't give a name. He asked if we'd seen. His exact words were, an elderly man, possibly confused, might have wandered in. He said he was looking for someone." She paused. "He described you, your height, your clothes. He knew which rest stop to ask about." My jaw tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I said I hadn't seen anyone matching that description." Her eyes met mine directly. I didn't know if I did the right thing. I held her gaze for a moment. The hollow space in my chest pressed outward against my ribs. I thought about Marcus's voice through the car window, flat and deliberate and prepared. I thought about Renee choosing this location. Renee who knew things before they were public. And now a phone call that morning asking about a confused old man. Not a missing father. Not a man who had been left behind. A confused old man. "You did the right thing, June," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She exhaled a small release of something she'd been holding and nodded. Tom came by as the sun went low, and he dragged the second chair close and sat down beside me, and we watched the mountains go from gold to copper to shadow. After a while, he asked, "You doing okay?" "Getting there," I said. He nodded like that was the right answer and didn't push further. That night, I lay awake thinking about that phone call. Someone was asking about a confused old man wandering around the desert. Not a missing father. Not a man who'd been abandoned. A confused old man. Someone was already rewriting the story, deciding what version of me the world would see when this was over. And whoever made that call knew exactly which rest stop to ask about. By Sunday morning, I had stopped waiting for Marcus to call. What I started doing instead was thinking, really thinking, the way you can only do when everything else has been stripped away, and there's nothing left but time and desert silence. I sat on the edge of the bed at 6 in the morning, with my coffee going cold on the nightstand, and I went back through everything methodically the way I used to go back through a construction plan when something in the numbers didn't add up. You start at the beginning. You follow every line. You don't assume the error is where it looks like it is. I was still at it when I went out to find Tom. He was in the small office behind the front desk, working through what looked like a week's worth of maintenance logs, handwritten, which I respected. He had a cup of coffee at his elbow and a pencil behind his ear, and he moved through the pages with the patient, unhurried precision of a man who had been doing this exact thing for a very long time. I stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment, and what I noticed was the quality of his concentration. Not distracted, not performing busyness, actually present in the work the way people used to be before everyone started carrying the entire world in their pocket. "You run this place alone?" I asked. Tom looked up. "June handles the front. I handle everything else." "How long?" "22 years." He set his pencil down. "Sit down, Jean." I pulled the chair from the corner and sat. The office was small, a desk, 2 filing cabinets, a shelf of binders, a window that looked out at the back lot. And on the wall beside the door, there was a photograph in a simple wooden frame, facing the wall. The frame had been there long enough that the paint around the hanging nail had yellowed slightly, and a thin line of dust had gathered along the top edge of the frame. But it was still there. Someone had kept it on the wall for years while deliberately keeping it turned away. I looked at it for a moment longer than I meant to. "Tom," I said, "the phone call yesterday, the one asking about a confused old man. Do you know who made it?" Tom looked at me with that steady, unreadable expression he seemed to wear as a default. "I have a guess," he said, and I think you already know the answer to that too." My jaw tightened. I pressed my hands flat on my thighs and kept my voice level. "He called 4 contacts that same day," I said. "People who know me or know of me. He told them I wandered off, that I seemed disoriented." I paused. "He's building a story." "Yes," Tom said. "Just that. No elaboration, no outrage on my behalf, no reassurance. Just the quiet confirmation of a man who had already arrived at the same conclusion and was waiting to see if I had too." "You know something about me," I said. "Something you haven't told me." Tom held my gaze. He did not look away, and he did not look guilty, and he did not offer me the polite deflection of a man who was going to pretend he didn't understand the question. "When the time is right," he said. I wanted to push harder. The part of me that had spent 40 years managing construction projects, solving problems, demanding answers, cutting through everything that wasn't the point, that part wanted to put both hands on the desk and say, "Tom, the time is right now." But I looked at his face and understood something I couldn't entirely articulate. Whatever he was carrying, it wasn't something he would say before he was ready, and pressing him would only close the door. "All right," I said. I used the landline after lunch. I dialed Marcus's number and stood beside Tom's desk with the receiver against my ear and listened to it ring. It rang once. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he had seen the number and made a decision. I heard the connection open, that slight change in the quality of the silence that tells you someone is there. "Marcus," I said. 3 seconds. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. The line went dead. I stood there with the receiver in my hand and the dial tone buzzing against my ear, and something moved through my chest that I didn't have a clean name for, not rage, not grief, though it had elements of both. It was the feeling of a door being closed in your face by someone who has your face. My son had heard my voice and chosen silence over everything else. Over explanation, over argument, over the most basic human reflex of a child toward a parent. He had picked up, heard me, and hung up. I set the receiver back in the cradle. June was at the filing cabinet across the room, pulling a folder, her back to me. She didn't turn around. She didn't say anything. But after a moment, she walked to the small coffee station in the corner, filled a fresh cup, and set it on the desk beside me without a word. Then she rested one hand briefly on my shoulder, just the lightest pressure, just enough to say, "I see you," and walked back to her desk. "He hung up," I said. Not to June specifically, just out loud, because saying it made it real, and real was the only thing I could work with. "I know," June said quietly, not looking up from her desk. I took the coffee back to my room. I sat by the window for the rest of the afternoon, looking out at the desert, and I went through everything again in my exact order. 8 months ago, Renee accessed the zoning documents. 3 months ago, I transferred the deed to Sophie. 6 weeks ago, Marcus came to my door at 10 at night with a folder of papers. 3 weeks ago, he came with coffee and the invitation. Friday morning, the drive. Friday afternoon, the parking lot. The open window, the flat and final voice. And now Sunday afternoon, a dial tone in an empty office and a confused old man's story being fed to anyone who would listen. I thought about the photograph on Tom's wall turned to face the plaster. About 22 years at a rest stop on Highway 93. About someone did it for me once, a long time ago, and the particular weight in his voice when he said it. 48 hours. My son had hung up on me. Someone had called this station, asking about a senile old man, and the stranger who had taken me in without explanation kept looking at me like he was waiting for the right moment to say something important. All of it was connected. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing in your bones before you can see it in the sky. Before I go any further, 3 days have passed. Gene has heard nothing from his son, and something is about to happen that changes everything. If you've made it this far with me, drop the number 10 in the comments right now. Just that. Let me know you're still here because what comes next, I don't want you to miss. A small note. The story ahead contains some recreated and fictional elements shaped to carry a deeper message. If that's not for you, no hard feelings at all. But if you choose to stay, I promise it will be worth it. I had just turned off the lamp when the room phone rang. Not my cell, the nightstand phone, the old kind with a cord. I picked it up thinking it was Tom checking in. The voice on the other end was not Tom. Grandpa. My whole body went still. The voice was Sophie's, but not the Sophie I knew. Not the girl who sat at Eleanor's kitchen table and talked about chemistry exams and old photographs. This Sophie's voice was tight and small and stripped of everything except the effort not to fall apart. Sophie. I sat up straight, both feet on the floor, every nerve in me suddenly awake. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm at Jenna's house. She drew in a breath that wasn't quite steady. I'm okay. Grandpa, are you okay? Are you safe? Not where are you? Not what happened. Are you safe? I noticed that immediately, the specific word she had chosen, the fear underneath it, and something clenched hard behind my ribs. I'm safe, I said. I'm at a motel. Someone's been taking care of me. I'm all right. I kept my voice as even as I could manage. Now tell me, why is Jenna calling me from Jenna's phone? Because they took mine. Her voice cracked on the last word just slightly before she pulled it back. Mom took it when they got home Friday night. She said it needed to be charged and just kept it. I couldn't call anyone. The cold settled in deeper. All right, I said. Tell me everything. She told me. 2 weeks before the trip, Sophie had been in the kitchen doing homework when Marcus left his phone on the counter and went to answer the door. The screen was lit. Sophie hadn't meant to look, but the notification was right there, the preview visible, and the words stopped her before she could stop herself. She picked up the phone. She read the message thread. Then she took 4 screenshots, emailed them to her school account, and put the phone back exactly where it had been. I didn't know what to do with them, she said. Her voice had gone very small. I kept thinking maybe I was misreading it. Maybe it meant something else. But then you didn't come home Friday night, and I knew I hadn't misread it. What did the messages say? I asked. My voice was steady. My free hand pressed flat against the bed cover was not. Sophie read them to me. Marcus to Renee. After this weekend, the old man won't be our problem anymore. Renee to Marcus finally. We've waited long enough. The room did not change. The desert wind was still moving against the window. The lamp on the nightstand was still off, and the only light was the thin strip coming under the door from the hallway. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 30 seconds ago. But something in me broke open. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies with noise and collapse. Quietly. The way something very old and very solid gives way when the ground beneath it finally shifts. I felt it in my chest first, that hollow cracking I had been pressing back since Friday afternoon, and then my eyes burned, and then for the first time since Marcus had driven away and left me standing in a parking lot with my hand in the air, the tears came. I didn't make a sound. I pressed the back of my wrist against my mouth and breathed through my nose and let it happen because it was going to happen regardless, and there was no one in the room to see it except me. Sophie's voice came through the receiver, smaller now. "Grandpa, are you still there?" "I'm here." My voice came out rougher than I intended. I cleared my throat. "I'm here, sweetheart. I had them for 2 weeks." She was crying now, too. I could hear it, that particular uneven breathing of someone trying not to cry and losing. I didn't know what to do, and I was scared. "And I'm so sorry I waited. I should have—" "Sophie?" I said her name the way Eleanor used to say mine when I was heading towards something that didn't need to go any further. Firm. Loving. Final. "You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? Nothing. You were 16 years old, and you were scared, and you did the best you could. That is not nothing wrong. That is exactly right." A shuddering exhale on the other end of the line. "Okay," she said, small and raw and trusting. "Now listen to me carefully." I straightened my shoulders. My voice had found its footing again. "Don't tell your father or Renee that you called tonight. Don't tell them you have those screenshots. Keep them somewhere they can't access. Your school email is good. Don't delete them. Don't forward them to anyone yet. Can you do that?" "Yes." "You're sure?" "Yes, Grandpa, I promise." "Good." I exhaled slowly. "Where are your parents right now?" "Home. They think I'm sleeping over at Jenna's for a school project. I have to be back before noon tomorrow, or they'll know something's wrong." "Then go back. Act normal. Don't give them any reason to look at you differently." I paused. "How are you doing, honestly?" A beat of quiet. Then, "I'm really scared." "I know." My chest pulled tight. "So am I. But we're going to be okay. I promise you that." "Do you promise?" "On your grandmother's name," I said. "I promise." Another uneven breath. Then very softly, "I love you, Grandpa. Please come home." Something split open in me all over again, right along the same fault line. "I love you too," I said. "More than you know. Now go get some sleep." I held the receiver for a moment, after the line went quiet, just sitting there in the dark, with it in both hands, not ready to put it down. When I finally set it back in the cradle, I sat without moving for a long time. After this weekend, the old man won't be our problem anymore. Not a moment of anger. Not an impulsive thought between two people pushed past their limit. A text message. Typed. Sent. Confirmed with "finally." We've waited long enough. It was written down. It had a timestamp. It existed in the world as a permanent documented fact. My son had planned this, in writing, 2 weeks before the trip. I sat in the dark for a long time after Sophie hung up. My granddaughter had been carrying those screenshots for 2 weeks, scared, not knowing who to trust, not knowing what to do, 16 years old, and she had figured out what was happening before I did. She had also done something else, I realized. Something I wouldn't find out about until the next morning. Something that was going to change everything. I knocked on Tom's office door at 6:30 Monday morning. He was already at his desk, coffee in hand, looking at something on his laptop screen. He looked up when I pushed the door open and said, "I was wondering when you'd come." Like he'd been expecting me since the night before. Like the only variable had been the exact time I'd appear in his doorway. I sat down across from him and put both hands around the coffee cup June had pressed into my hands on the way through the front room, and I told him about Sophie. All of it. The phone ringing in the dark. The tight, scared voice that was not the voice I was used to hearing from my granddaughter. The screenshots she had been carrying for 2 weeks, too frightened to know what to do with them. The message Marcus to Renee written down, time-stamped permanent after this weekend, "The old man won't be our problem anymore." and Renee's answer. Finally. We've waited long enough. Tom listened without moving. His coffee sat untouched on the desk beside him. His eyes stayed on my face the entire time I spoke, and the expression on his face was not shock and not pity, and not the careful neutrality of a man trying to decide what to feel. It was something else, a deep, focused attention that felt less like listening and more like confirming. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once, slowly. Your granddaughter called Patricia Dunmore this morning, he said. 6:15. I stared at him. What? She read the screenshots to her over the phone. All of them. Tom set his cup down. Pat called me after. She'd handled a property boundary dispute for this station 12 years ago. We've kept in touch since. You know Pat? I asked, though the answer was already clear. Long enough to trust her, he said. Simple. Final. Not an explanation, a fact offered without elaboration, in the tone of a man who would say more when he was ready and not before. I pressed back against the chair and let that settle. Sophie had not just called me. Sophie, 16 years old, sitting in her friend's bedroom after midnight terrified, had found Pat Dunmore's number and read those screenshots aloud into a phone and made sure an attorney had them on record. My granddaughter had done what I hadn't yet thought to do, and she had done it at 6:15 in the morning, before I was even out of bed. My eyes burned, and I pressed my knuckle hard against my mouth for a moment, before I trusted myself to speak. Pat recorded the call, I asked. With Sophie's consent, yes. Both parties in Arizona both consented. Tom turned his laptop toward me. There's something else. The screen showed security camera footage, the Ironwood Station parking lot, timestamp in the corner. Friday, 2:17 p.m. I watched Marcus's car back out of the space, pause at the lot's edge, and pull onto Highway 93 without hesitation. The footage was clear. The timestamp was clear. I was visible in the frame, standing in the lot with my hand half raised. Location data, he said, pointing to a second window on the screen. Sophie had shared location turned on with Marcus's account. He'd set it up himself 2 years ago, so the family could track each other. She screenshotted the movement log before he thought to disable it. Straight line from this station back toward Kingman. No stops, no detours, no loopback. I looked at the straight, unbroken line on the map and felt something cold move through me. There had been no emergency, no reason to leave suddenly and come back. He had driven away and kept driving and not once turned around. Tom. My voice came out flatter than I intended. How do you have his GPS data? Sophie sent Pat the screenshots this morning. Everything came from Sophie. Nothing was requested through third parties. It's all documented and preserved. He closed the laptop. And there's more. He slid a single printed page across the desk. 4 names: my neighbor Dale, my old friend from the construction years, Phil Garrett, Dr. Raymond Cole from the practice I'd been with for 15 years, and a woman named Carol Sims, who had lived 3 houses down from Eleanor and me for 20 years. 4 people who knew me. 4 people who would be asked at some point about my state of mind. All 4 had received calls from Marcus within 48 hours of Friday afternoon. All 4 had been told some version of the same story, that I had seemed confused lately, that I had a history of wandering, that the family was concerned. My hand tightened on the edge of the desk. The paper crinkled slightly under my grip. He was preparing for my return, I said. Yes, Tom said. He didn't just leave me here. He was building a case. I set the paper down carefully, deliberately, so that when I came back and said what happened, 4 people who've known me for decades would already have doubts. He was making sure no one else would believe you either, Tom said. The room felt very still. Outside the window, the early morning light was spreading flat and gold across the back lot, and somewhere out on the highway, a truck was going past, and the world was continuing on completely indifferent to the fact that my son had spent 3 days constructing a version of me that didn't exist. I looked at Tom directly. Tom, who are you? Why does any of this matter to you? He looked back at me for a long moment. Then he stood, picked up his cup, walked to the small carafe on the filing cabinet, and poured himself more coffee. He poured a second cup and set it in front of me without asking. Then he sat back down, wrapped both hands around his mug, and met my eyes with an expression that was entirely honest and entirely incomplete. Not yet, he said, but soon. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth and held his gaze. How soon? The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the nearest thing to one I had seen from him. When they get here, he said. Tom said not yet, and I didn't push him. Because something else was happening, something could feel building the way you feel a storm coming in off the desert, that particular heaviness in the air, before everything breaks open. Pat Dunmore had the evidence. Tom had the footage. Sophie had done what needed to be done, which meant Marcus was about to find out that the game he thought he was playing had already been decided. And when he found out, he was going to call. I was sitting on the edge of the bed reading when my phone found a signal for the first time since Friday. 1 bar, then 2. I watched the bars appear like something coming back to life, slow and deliberate, the way a fire catches from the smallest ember and spreads before you've decided whether you wanted it to. I put the book face down on the bed. I watched the screen, and then it rang. The name came up immediately. Marcus calling. I sat there and looked at it. My heart did not race, my hands did not shake. Something in me had gone very quiet and very clear, the way it used to go before a hard conversation on a job site, when I knew what needed to be said, and I was just waiting for the right moment to say it. I let the phone ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I picked it up. Dad! Marcus's voice came through tight and fast, stripped of any preamble. Where are you? I need you to come home. Right now. I let a beat pass. Good morning, Marcus. A fraction of a second of silence, not the 3-second calculation from Sunday, but the shorter, more revealing pause of a man who had prepared for anger and received composure instead, and didn't know where to put that. Dad, this isn't, I need you to listen to me. I'm listening, I said. Sophie called Pat Dunmore. His voice tightened further. She had no right to do that. She's 16 years old. She doesn't understand what she's... Those screenshots don't show what she thinks they... What did Sophie tell Pat Marcus? That's not the point. Dad, we need to talk about this in person. Just come home and we can sit down and I can explain. 3 days, I said. He stopped. 72 hours, I said. Not one call to the police to report a missing person. Not one call to a hospital to ask if I'd been brought in. Not one call to this station. I kept my voice level and unhurried, and every word landed like something measured and placed. But 4 calls to my neighbors, my doctor, and my friends, all within 48 hours, telling them I was losing my mind. The line was quiet. Outside my window, the desert sat in full morning light, hard and bright, and without a single shadow. I could hear Marcus breathing. I was worried about you, he said. His voice had changed. The panic had compressed itself into something flatter, more controlled. I was trying to... Marcus. I kept my voice even. Which part are you worried about? That I'm still here, or that the land already belongs to Sophie? The silence that followed was different from the others. It was the silence of a man who has just heard the one sentence he was not prepared for and is taking stock of the damage. I could hear it in the quality of the line, in the way his breathing shifted. He had not known until this moment that I knew he knew. You need to come home, he said finally, and his voice had gone very careful, and we need to fix this. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The word fix as though there was a version of this that could be repaired with a conversation and some goodwill, as though the text message did not exist, as though 4 people in Kingman had not already received phone calls about a confused old man wandering around the desert. "Fix what exactly?" I said. He didn't answer. I could hear him working through something. Options approaches the calculation behind the composure. My son was many things, and one of them had always been quick. He was running the numbers right now and finding they did not add up the way he had expected. "Marcus," I said, "I'll be here when you're ready to have an honest conversation." "Dad!" "Goodbye, Marcus." I ended the call. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment, and my chest felt strange. Not the hollow cracking of Friday night. Not the hot, uncontrolled grief of Sunday evening. Something steadier. Something that sat in the center of my ribs like a weight that had stopped moving. It wasn't victory. It was clarity. The kind that comes when you stop hoping the answer will be different from what you already know it is. I walked to Tom's office. He was at the desk, the laptop open, a second cup of coffee already poured, and waiting on the corner of the desk nearest the door. He looked up when I came in, and something in my face told him what he needed to know before I said a word. "He called," Tom said. "He called." I sat down and picked up the coffee. "He knows about Sophie and Pat. He's calling it a misunderstanding. He wants me to come home so we can, his word, fix it." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "What did you say?" I asked him which part he was worried about, whether I was still here or whether the land already belongs to Sophie. I looked at Tom. He didn't answer. Tom nodded slowly, his jaw set, his eyes carrying that deliberate steadiness that I had come to understand meant he was processing something he had already anticipated. He reached over and closed the laptop. "They're coming," he said. "Not he, they." I set my cup down. Both of them. Both of them. I had spent 3 days thinking about what I would say to Marcus when I finally saw him face to face. I had rehearsed versions of it in room 7, lying on that thin mattress watching the ceiling. I had thought about what I needed him to understand, what I needed to hear from him, what a real conversation between us would even look like after everything that had happened. Sitting in Tom's office, I realized I hadn't thought nearly enough about Renee. While Marcus and Renee made the 200-mile drive, Tom told me what he'd found out about Renee Calloway. He'd been holding it until he thought I was ready to hear it. I'm not sure I was ever fully ready. We were in the office, the door closed. The desert doing what the desert does at midday, pressing heat against every surface with the patient indifference of something that has been here far longer than anything built by human hands. Tom had refilled both our cups and set a single printed page on the desk between us, and he started from the beginning. 8 months ago, he said, Renee accessed the Copper Mesa Flats zoning records at her firm. She works as a paralegal. She had access to planning documents that hadn't been released publicly yet. The rezoning corridor was in preliminary files. She knew the projected value before any public announcement, before any real estate publication, before anyone outside that planning office had connected the dots. Before Marcus ever came to my door in February, I said. 6 weeks before February, Tom said. She had the information 6 weeks before the first visit. I set my cup down carefully. My jaw was tight and I made myself unclench it, one deliberate muscle at a time. So the 3 visits weren't Marcus's idea. I don't know whose idea they were, Tom said. But I know whose information they were built on. He paused. She's careful, Jean. There's no written plan. No emails I can point to, no text thread outlining what they intended to do out here. Everything between them was verbal, except for one thing. He slid the printed page across to me. I picked it up. It was a consultation record, not a full document, just a summary of an appointment. A Phoenix attorney named Daniel Marsh, specializing in real estate and family asset law. The appointment date was 3 weeks before the trip to Ironwood Station. The subject of the consultation was listed as transferring property interest in case of marital dissolution without spouse's signature. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the desk and pressed my palm flat over it, as though I could keep the words from spreading further into the room. She consulted a separate lawyer, I said, not their shared attorney, her own, about how to transfer the land without Marcus, about how to acquire the land without Marcus's involvement in the final step, Tom said. There's a difference. She wasn't planning to fail. She was planning for two outcomes, one where Marcus stayed useful and one where he didn't. The room felt very still. Outside the window, the midday sun had flattened everything in the parking lot to white and shadow, no gradations, no softness, just the hard geometry of a desert at noon. I stared out at it and felt something shift in my chest that I had not expected to feel. Not anger, not the cold, measured fury that had been sitting in my sternum since Friday afternoon. Something else. Something that made my throat tighten in an entirely different way. Marcus doesn't know, I said. No, Tom's voice was even. I don't think he does. I thought about my son. I thought about the boy who had fallen asleep in the passenger seat of my truck on the way back from fishing trips when he was 9 years old, his cheek against the window, his mouth open, trusting completely that someone else was at the wheel. I thought about the man who had shown up on my doorstep 3 times with increasing desperation, pushing harder each time, not because the plan was his, but because someone had convinced him the outcome depended on him. I thought about Renee's voice in my living room in May, smooth and practiced public record anyone can access planning documents. The way she had managed that room. Managed Marcus. Managed me. She used him, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. She needed someone with the legal standing to pressure me. His name on the deed. His relationship with me. She used all of it. Yes, Tom said. And when it stopped working when I didn't sign, she moved to the next phase, which Marcus agreed to. I stopped, pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum, or was manipulated into agreeing to. Possibly both, Tom said. People can be manipulated into things they also want to do. The manipulation doesn't cancel the wanting. That landed somewhere deep and uncomfortable, and I sat with it for a moment without trying to resolve it. Because Tom was right. Marcus had wanted that land. Marcus had made his own choice on Friday afternoon, his own voice, his own words through the car window. The fact that Renee had built the architecture of the plan didn't make his hands any less the ones that drove away, but it added something, a layer of grief underneath the anger that I hadn't had room for until now. Tom. I looked at him directly. After all of this is over, you're going to tell me the real reason, aren't you, why you helped me, why you knew Pat, why you had all of this? Tom looked at me for a long moment. His expression did not change that same steady, unhurried attention that he had offered me since the first moment in the parking lot. Then he said, "Yes, I am. But not before they get here. But not before they get here," he confirmed. He stood, moved to the window, and looked out at the highway. A car was pulling in at the far end of the lot, not Marcus, just a family in a minivan, kids tumbling out the back doors. "About 45 minutes, Tom said. I got up, thanked him for the coffee, and walked back to my room. 45 minutes. I went back to my room and sat by the window. I thought about the man Marcus used to be, the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck on the way back from fishing trips, head against the window, trusting completely that someone else would get him home safe. I thought about what it takes to go from that boy to the man who drove away on Friday. And I thought about Renee and what she had turned that journey into. I saw their car from my window before they saw me. Marcus was driving too fast, the way he always did. When he was nervous, that particular aggressive speed that wasn't aggression, so much as displacement energy with nowhere to go, and Renee sat perfectly straight in the passenger seat, the way she always did when she was thinking. Even through the glass and across the width of the parking lot, I could read them both as clearly as I had ever read anything. I stood up. I put on my jacket, though it was warm. It was the kind of thing you do when you want your body to be ready before your mind has decided what for. I went out and stood in front of my door and waited. Marcus got out of the car and his eyes found me immediately. He'd been scanning for me before he was fully out of the seat. He came across the lot with quick, long strides, and his face was doing that thing it did when he was running two conversations at once, the external one and the internal one. Dad. He stopped about 3 feet away, close enough to reach me, not close enough to have committed to anything. Thank God. Are you all right? I looked at him. I didn't move toward him, and I didn't move away from him. I just stood there and looked, and whatever he saw in my face made him stop talking and made his next step not happen. He stood there 3 feet away and swallowed. Renee came around the front of the car at her own pace, unhurried, deliberate spine, straight shoulders back. Her eyes were moving. Not darting, not nervous, moving with purpose the way an architect's eyes move through a building they are assessing. The parking lot, the main office door, the window of Tom's office, the position of every person and object in her immediate environment. I had been watching her do that for 4 years and had always told myself it was professional habit. I understood it differently now. Let's go inside, I said. I led them to the small sitting room off the main office, 4 chairs around a low table, a window facing the lot. Afternoon light, cutting flat, and even across the floor. Tom had arranged the room sometime in the past hour. I didn't know when. I had stopped being surprised by Tom's quiet preparedness. Marcus sat down, and his hands went immediately to the bag on his shoulder. He pulled out a folder, thick, rubber-banded, the kind of folder that takes deliberate preparation, and set it on the table. He pushed it across toward me with the flat of his hand. Dad, I brought the paperwork. His voice had the quality of a man reciting something he had rehearsed in the car. I just need you to look at it. We can fix all of this right now today, if you just read through it, and we can talk. I looked at the folder. I did not touch it. Renee was watching me from the chair to Marcus's left. Her expression was composed, that smooth, surface-level composure that she wore like a second skin. But something behind her eyes was working hard. She was calculating, even now, assessing her position, looking for the angle that still existed. The door opened. Tom walked in. He had a thick manila envelope under one arm and his laptop in his other hand, and he moved with the unhurried certainty of a man who had been in this room before, who knew exactly where he was going and why. He pulled the remaining chair from the corner and sat down at the end of the table without a word of explanation or apology. Marcus looked at Tom, then at me, then at Tom again. And in that single circuit of his eyes, I watched something happen behind his face. A fast, quiet collapse, the specific expression of a man who has spent 3 hours in a car building toward a plan and has just walked into the room and understood in the space of 2 seconds that the plan is already dead. His jaw tightened. The hand resting on the folder closed into a fist and then deliberately, visibly forced itself flat again. Renee was faster. She was already speaking. Mr. Briggs. Her voice was even professional and carried exactly the right amount of polite authority, the voice she would use in a deposition. I don't know what involvement you think you have here, but this is a private family matter. I'm going to have to ask you to— It stopped being private, Tom said, pulling his chair in, setting the laptop on the table, opening the envelope with one smooth motion. When you called this station asking about a senile old man. Renee's mouth closed. It was the first time I had ever seen Renee Calloway at a loss for her next sentence. She recovered quickly. She was too practiced not to, but for 3 full seconds she had nothing. Her eyes moved to the envelope. They moved to the laptop screen as Tom turned it toward the table. They moved back to Tom's face, and for the first time since I had known her, the calculation behind her expression was visible. She was not composed. She was managing. Marcus was not managing anything. He was looking at his father, and the fist his hand had made on the table was still closed, and his face had gone the particular gray of a man who has just felt the ground shift under a structure he believed was solid. Tom set his laptop on the table and opened it. Renee's eyes moved to the screen. Marcus's eyes moved to the envelope. And I sat back in my chair and thought for 3 days I had been the one who didn't know what was happening. That was about to change. Tom opened his laptop and turned the screen so all of us could see. He didn't say anything at first. He just let the footage speak. The timestamp in the corner read, Friday, 2:17 p.m. The parking lot of Ironwood Station, shot from the camera mounted above the main entrance, wide-angle, clear resolution, every detail exactly as I remembered it, and nothing as I wanted it to be. Marcus's car backing out of the space, the rear end swinging toward Highway 93. The car pausing at the edge of the lot for a fraction of a second, long enough for a window to go down, long enough for something to be said, and then accelerating away. And then the footage kept running. I watched myself standing in the middle of that empty parking lot, one hand still partway up, dust settling in the tire tracks, the sun pressing down on the frame of an old man who was trying to understand what had just happened to him. Tom let the footage run for another 90 seconds, long enough to show me walking slowly to the bench, sitting down, opening my thermos. Long enough to show 3 vehicles rolling past on the highway without slowing. Long enough to make the duration of it felt rather than simply understood. Across the table, Marcus had gone very still. Tom closed that window and opened the next one. GPS data, he said. From Monday morning, obtained through Patricia Dunmore via proper legal channels. He turned the laptop slightly so the map was visible to everyone at the table. A single line, straight unbroken, originating at the pin, marked Ironwood Station on Highway 93 and terminating in Kingman. No stops, no detours, no loop back toward the station at any point in the following 72 hours. He set a second document beside the laptop. A printed list, 4 lines each one, a timestamp, and a brief notation. No missing person report filed with Arizona DPS. No inquiry to the Mojave County Sheriff's Office. No call to any hospital within 100 miles of this station. Tom's voice was unhurried, factual, the voice of someone reading from a record, rather than building an argument. In 72 hours, no official action was taken to locate a 72-year-old man left without transportation, without reliable phone signal in the October desert. Marcus shifted in his chair. His hand went to the folder on the table, not picking it up, just touching it the way a man touches something familiar when the ground beneath him becomes uncertain. Tom, this is a family situation. You don't have the full context here. There were reasons. Let me finish, Tom said. Marcus's mouth closed. His jaw was tight and the muscle along it moved once, twice, as though he were chewing on something he could not swallow. Tom reached into the envelope and produced a single page, a table, 4 rows, 4 names I recognized immediately. Dale from next door. Phil Garrett from the old crew. Dr. Raymond Cole. Carol Sims from 3 houses down. Against each name, a date, a time, and a brief notation of what had been said. He said it in front of Marcus. In the 48 hours after you left your father at this station, Tom said, you contacted 4 people in his personal life. His neighbor, his oldest friend, his family doctor, his late wife's neighbor of 20 years. He let each name sit for a moment. You told each of them in different words the same thing, that your father had been showing signs of confusion, that he had a history of wandering, that the family was concerned. He paused. You made those calls before anyone had started looking for him. Marcus looked at the page. The color had drained from his face, leaving something pale and exposed underneath, like concrete when the top layer comes away. His hand on the table went flat, pressing down both palms, the way a man braces himself when he has run out of other options. He didn't say a word. Renee was watching Tom with the focused, controlled expression of a woman running rapid calculations behind very still eyes. She had not touched the table. She had not moved toward Marcus or away from him. She was simply watching and processing and waiting for the right moment. Tom reached into the envelope a third time. He set a printed page in the center of the table. I knew what it was before I could read it. I had heard the words through a phone receiver in the dark of room 7 2 nights ago, read to me by a 16-year-old girl who had been carrying them alone for 2 weeks. After this weekend, the old man won't be our problem anymore. Finally, we've waited long enough. The words sat on the white page under the afternoon light, plain and permanent, and exactly what they were. Renee looked at the printout. Something moved through her face, not guilt, not remorse, but the specific expression of a person recalibrating under pressure, identifying the new parameters of a situation that had shifted beyond their planned margins. She had an answer for everything. She was finding this one now. "Those messages are out of context," she said. Her voice was still controlled, impressive, actually, under the circumstances. Sophie is 16 years old. She doesn't understand adult conversations. She doesn't understand the full picture of what... Patricia Dunmore has the originals, Tom said. The timestamps, the metadata, the recorded call in which Sophie read them aloud and consented to their use. He looked at Renee evenly. "Would you like her number?" Renee said nothing, and then Marcus looked at her. Not the quick checking glance of a man seeking confirmation. A long, direct look. The look of a man who has just heard something that has rearranged the furniture of a room he thought he knew perfectly. He looked at Renee and waited for her to look back. She did not look back at him. She kept her eyes on the middle distance, not the page, not Tom, not me, just the neutral space in front of her, as though the answer to whatever Marcus was asking with his eyes was something she had decided not to provide. I watched my son watch his wife refuse to meet his gaze, and I watched something shift behind his expression, something slow and irreversible, the way ice shifts in late winter, not breaking yet, but changed underneath in a way that cannot be undone. Tom closed the laptop. The room settled into a quiet that had weight and texture. Then he reached into the envelope one more time and took out something I hadn't seen him prepare, something old, the edges worn one corner slightly darker than the rest. He set it face down in the center of the table. "Before we finish," he said, "there's one more thing, and this one isn't about the land." Tom turned the photograph over slowly, like he had been waiting 42 years to do exactly this, and now that the moment had come, he wasn't going to rush it. It was a black and white photograph, roughly 4x6 edges softened with age, one corner darker than the rest. Heat damaged the paper, warped where something very warm had come close to it long ago. The image was clear despite its age, a car overturned on a 2-lane road. Undercarriage exposed, dark smoke rising from the engine. In the foreground, 2 figures, one being pulled, one pulling both low to the ground, urgent in a way that the stillness of a photograph cannot fully contain, but somehow does anyway. I stared at it. Something stirred in the back of my memory, not a clear image, more like a physical sensation. Hot metal under my hands, the smell of burning plastic and spilled fuel. A voice, hoarse and frightened from inside a car, beginning to smoke in the wrong places. "October 1982, Tom said. "Right on this highway, half a mile north of where we're sitting. I was 26, coming back from a night shift in Phoenix construction work overnight crew. My rear tire caught something on the road. I lost control. The car went over." He paused. "The engine caught fast. The door on my side was crushed against the asphalt. The passenger door had jammed. I couldn't get out." He set his hands flat on the table and looked at them as though reminding himself they were still there. I could see the fire from where I was sitting, starting at the hood, moving back. His voice was even, each word placed with care. "I had time to think. That's the part people don't expect. You have time. You think very clearly." Marcus had gone completely still. His hands were flat on either side of the folder, and he was not looking at the papers, and he was not looking at his wife. He was looking at Tom. 11 cars drove past, Tom said. I counted them. I had time to count. The room held that number, 11. I felt it in my chest, not as information, but as weight. The 12th car stopped. Tom looked up and looked directly at me. In his expression was something I had not seen in 3 days, not the steady composure, not the careful withholding. Something open. Something kept behind glass for 42 years, and now finally in the room with us. A young man, he said. He didn't ask if I was okay. He went straight to the passenger door, the one that had jammed, and grabbed the handle with both hands and pulled. Tom's voice tightened once, then steadied. The metal was hot. The edges were sharp. He cut his hands open on the frame. I was screaming at him to stop, and he didn't. He just kept pulling until the door gave. He touched the edge of the photograph, the figure in the foreground, the one pulling white shirt torn at the shoulder. He dragged me 30 feet from the car before he set me down. The car went fully maybe 90 seconds later. He looked at me. He stayed until the ambulance came. 45 minutes on the side of the road, holding a piece of his own shirt against the cut on my forearm. He never asked my name. He never told me his. He just stayed. I looked down at the photograph. The young man kneeling beside the figure on the ground, one hand supporting one pressed to his own forearm. I recognized the posture before I recognized the face. The way I used to carry myself at 30. Shoulders forward, weight on the balls of my feet, always ready to move. My eyes burned. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose and kept my hands flat on the table. They were shaking, a fine, slow tremor, the kind that comes when a person puts down something they have been carrying without knowing it. I had not thought about that afternoon on Highway 93 in 30 years. I had filed it away under ordinary things. You stopped. You helped, you drove away. That was what you did. I had not known his name. I had not known he was still on this road. Tom placed one hand briefly on my shoulder. Then he turned to Marcus with the full direct attention of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment and intends to use it. The man who saved my life in October 1982, Tom said, is the man your family left alone in this desert 3 days ago. The words went into the room and stayed there. Marcus stared at the photograph. His mouth opened, the beginning of a breath that didn't become a word. He looked at the image. He looked at me. He looked back at the image, and what moved across his face was not one emotion, but a cascade recognition rust, then something that traveled through his eyes like physical pain, then something harder and more complicated that came when he turned to Renee. She was looking straight ahead. Not at the photograph, not at Tom, not at me, not at her husband. Her eyes fixed on the middle distance with the rigid focus of a woman who has decided the way through this moment is to not be present in it. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. She did not turn. She did not flinch. She did not soften. She did not offer him a single thing. His throat moved. He looked back down at the photograph, and his right hand had closed into something tight and uneven against the wood. I could see the tendons standing up along the back of it under the skin. Tom's voice came one final time, quiet, without cruelty, with the absolute finality of a man stating a fact he has earned the right to state. I owe this man my life. He looked at Marcus without blinking. And you owe him an apology that I'm not sure you are capable of giving. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long time. I watched his face move through things I don't have words for recognition. Something that might have been shame, and then something else that came when he looked at Renee one more time, and she still would not look back. I watched my son understand in real time, sitting in that room, exactly what kind of person he had let himself become, and exactly who had helped him get there. What happened in the 4 hours after Tom set that photograph on the table was not what I had spent 3 days imagining. I had expected excuses, deflection, What I got was messier than that, and in its own way, more honest. Tom stood and reached into the envelope one final time. A single printed page, a name, a date, a subject line placed in the center of the table without comment. 3 weeks before the trip, he said. A Phoenix attorney named Daniel Marsh. The consultation subject is on the record. He set his hand briefly on the page, then lifted it. I'll leave you to it. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. Just the three of us and one printed page. Marcus picked it up. I watched his eyes move across it, the name, the date, the subject. Transferring property interest in case of marital dissolution without spouse's signature. He read it once, set it down, picked it up and read it again as though the words might have changed between readings. They had not changed. Did you call that attorney? His voice was very quiet. The one in Phoenix. Renee held her posture, spine straight, hands folded. 1 second passed. 2. The pause was not confusion. It was the pause of a woman deciding how to answer a question she had always known would come, and finding her prepared answer no longer fit the room. She did not deny it. Marcus made a sound, not a word, not a cry, something between the two. A short, airless sound like something solid being punctured. Then he laughed. A single hollow note with nothing of humor in it. So I was the backup plan all along, he said. Renee turned and looked at her husband directly for the first time since Tom had entered the room. Without apology, without cruelty, the look of a person who has decided the cleanest way through is to stop pretending. You were never supposed to be the one who got caught, Marcus, she said. The words landed like something dropped from a height. His face moved through anger and passed it into something quieter and more devastating. A man seeing clearly for the first time the full shape of a thing he had been standing inside without understanding its size. He stood up slowly, no raised voice, no dramatic gesture, and walked out into the parking lot. I went after him. He was at the far end of the lot, hands in his jacket pockets, facing Highway 93, the same road he had driven away on 3 days ago. I walked across the asphalt and stood beside him. The afternoon heat had softened, and the sky above the mountains had turned pale gold. Dad, his voice was rough, used up. I'm sorry. No qualifications. Just those 2 words dropped into the air, the way you drop something you have held too long. Which part are you sorry about, Marcus? I asked. Leaving me here or getting caught? He breathed in slowly, looked at the pavement, looked at the sky. Then he looked at me, and for the first time since February, I saw something in his face that was not performance. Both, he said. I think both. That's honest, at least. His hands came out of his pockets and pressed together, fingers interlaced tension, running through them visibly. I told myself it would be good for you. Space. Independence. I let Renee convince me of things I should never have allowed. I kept telling myself it made sense because it was easier than... Then what? His throat moved. The words came out with the difficulty of something kept down too long, finally being allowed to surface. Then admitting that I wanted the land more than I wanted to be your son. I let that sentence exist in the air between us without rushing past it. The desert wind moved low across the lot. A truck went by on the highway. I thought about the boy who fell asleep against the truck window on fishing trips, and the man who had arrived today carrying a folder full of documents and everything it costs to travel that far from who you started out as. I love you, I said. I will always love you, but love doesn't mean I have to pretend this didn't happen, and it doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. Marcus nodded slowly, like a man accepting a verdict that is fair even though it hurts. I put my hand on his shoulder one brief solid moment, then dropped it and walked back inside. Renee was still in her chair, looking straight ahead. She heard me in the doorway and turned. Our eyes met. I nodded once, not forgiveness, not agreement, just the acknowledgement that another person exists and has been seen and walked on. That night, June told me quietly that Renee had taken the car keys and reclined the driver's seat when the lot lights came on. Marcus had come inside alone and taken the last remaining room. I sat listening to the desert settle into silence gradually, completely, like everything finally agreeing to stop pretending. Tomorrow I was going home. Not to the same home I had left Friday morning, but to something I had forgotten existed a life that belonged entirely to me and the people who had chosen to be in it. By the time the desert went fully dark on Monday night, the decisions that needed to be made had been made. Not loudly. Some of the most important ones happened in the quiet of a small motel room on a thin mattress, listening to the wind against the window, and finally knowing exactly what I wanted. I called Pat Dunmore at 9 from the room phone. "Jean," she said, "how are you holding up?" "Better than I was Friday," I said. "A lot has happened. Tom filled me in this afternoon. I have everything: camera footage, GPS, record the calls to your 4 contacts, Sophie's screenshots and her recorded consent call. It's all there." Something loosened in my chest. "The land transfer," I said. "Sophie's title. Legally complete and uncontestable," Pat said. "Copper Mesa Flats belongs to Sophie. That does not change. What are my options if I wanted to pursue this further? Elder abandonment under Arizona statute. Defamation, civil avenues. I can have a full outline on your desk by Thursday." "Not yet," I said. "Let me handle the rest my way." A brief pause. "Your call, Jean. Always has been." "Thanks, Sophie," she said before we hung up. She called me at 6:15 in the morning and read those messages with a voice steadier than most adults I've worked with in 20 years. I held the receiver after the line went quiet. 16 years old. 6:15 in the morning. Steadier than most adults. My throat burned in a way I didn't try to stop. I slept better that night than I had any right to. Marcus was in the hallway when I came out at 8, standing near the vending machine, hands in his pockets. The posture of a man who has been waiting and isn't sure he deserves to stop. No folder. No documents. Nothing in his hands at all. "Wasn't sure if you wanted to see me," he said. "I'm seeing you now," I said. We stood near the window overlooking the dark parking lot. Renee's car was still out there. "I need you to know," I said, "I'm not filing anything. Not right now. That's not a promise about the future, but it's where I am tonight." Something moved through his expression, more complicated than relief. "Okay," he said. "The land is Sophie's. That doesn't change, ever." "I hear it. And whatever's between you and Renee, that's yours. I won't be in the middle of it." His jaw worked for a moment. "Is there anything I can do to start somewhere?" I thought about it honestly. Not tonight. And Marcus, for the first time in years, accepted the answer without pushing for another one. He just said, "Okay," and meant it. I told him to get some rest and went back to my room. Tuesday morning came in stages. Desert dark, thinning to gray, then a thin line of gold along the mountain ridge, then the slow, full spread of an Arizona sunrise. I was dressed and packed before the light was fully up. June was in the dining room tables, empty coffee already made. She set a cup in front of me, and instead of returning to the counter, she pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. No questions. No reasonable things a person might say. She just sat there and kept me company while the room went from gray to gold around us. When I stood to go, I said, "Thank you, June, for the coffee, for everything else." She smiled the same unhurried smile from the first evening. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Calloway." "Jean," I said. "Jean," she agreed. Tom was waiting in the parking lot, with the station's truck running. We walked to the edge of the lot, the same spot where I had stood 4 days ago, with my hand raised and the sound of an engine fading away. I stood in it differently now, more settled, more certain of where my feet were. "Thank you, Tom, for all of it. You saved my life once," he said. "Seemed only fair. I didn't do it to be paid back." The corner of his mouth moved. "I know. That's exactly why I did it." We shook hands long, both hands the kind of handshake that carries what words no longer have room for. Then I got in the truck. An hour out from Kingman, I called Sophie. She answered before the second ring finished. "Grandpa, are you coming home?" "I'm on my way, sweetheart." "Oh, thank God." I heard her stand up. "I'll make coffee." I laughed, real and easy and startling the first time since before Friday morning. "You don't know how to make coffee?" "I'll figure it out," she said. I was still smiling when I put the phone in my pocket. The highway was empty that early. Just the road and the desert and the kind of morning light that makes everything look washed clean. I drove and thought about what it means to stop for someone when everyone else keeps going. I had done it once without thinking 42 years ago and forgotten about it completely. It had saved my life anyway, just on a different road in a different year, in a way I never could have predicted. Some things you do simply because they're right. And sometimes years later the world finds a way to make sure you know it noticed. I've told you this story not because I'm proud of what happened, but because I think it needed to be said out loud. I am a 72-year-old man who almost let pride stop him from protecting the people he loved. I waited too long to act trusted, too long out of habit, and confused loyalty with blindness. Don't do what I did. Don't wait until someone drives away before you decide what matters. If there's one thing 4 days in the Arizona desert taught me, it's that the people who truly choose you will show up before you ask. Sophie called at 6:15 in the morning. Tom stopped his truck on an empty highway. That's what love actually looks like. Not the kind that comes with paperwork. The kind that costs something. I'm not a religious man by habit. But sitting in that motel room on Friday night, I found myself grateful to God for the one detail nobody planned, that the 12th car stopped. Mine 42 years ago. Tom's when it mattered to me. My personal belief is simple family story doesn't have to mean blood. It means the people who stay. These are the grandpa stories. Nobody talks about the ones where the grandfather isn't wise from the beginning, but gets there the hard way. The real grandpa stories are messy and painful, and if you're lucky, they end with someone learning to make coffee. If this family story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more family story content like this, subscribing is the quietest way to say you'll come back. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And before you go, the stories ahead contain some fictional elements constructed purely with the hope of leaving you with something worth thinking about. If that's not what you're here for, no hard feelings. There's plenty of other content waiting for you. But if you decide to stay, I'll make it worth your while.